All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on Ask the Expert with Alexander Ervik Johnson. We're very excited to have him here, and we'll introduce him in a minute. We're really focused on asking Alex some of the key topics that are on a lot of your minds today in terms of how do you really isolate and prove root cause of end user issues now that everyone's working from home. So we did have some questions get submitted during the registration process. We talked with Alex about the questions he's hearing. So we have a few questions that we're going to run through today. And then please do submit yours throughout or now, and we'll make sure that we get to them because we're going to leave quite a bit of time to really let Alex speak. You also have with me Yemi Ladyju, and he is a senior technical consultant here at Goliath Technologies, and he's been working with organizations around the globe really helping them troubleshoot some of these issues. So he's here as well to answer a lot of these questions and show how Goliath supports. And then myself, I'm Stacy Ladwinger, and I'm here with the marketing team at Goliath Technologies. So before we get started, I already walked through the agenda. It's going to be very QA based. I am going to give a short intro about Goliath and some of the challenges we solve, and then we'll jump straight into Q&A. Please do submit your questions. We want to make this as interactive as possible. Your questions can be as deep and technical, and I'm sure Alex and Yemi will do their best to respond. So don't hesitate to really respond or ask anything on your mind. We really want this time to be yours. And then one question we do always get is this being recorded? Yes, the session's being recorded, and within the next 24 hours, you should have it in your inbox. So before we jump into the Ask the Expert, I do want to give a little bit of background around our guest speaker here, Alex. So Alex, many of you may know, he is very influential in the community around virtualization. He is an active blogger, architect, evangelist, author, speaker. Many of you have probably gone to his site and read through many of his articles that he's published. He's an expert across Citrix, Microsoft, and VMware. And as many of you may even work with him, he is a senior system engineer at Nutanix, so works obviously very closely with the Nutanix community. And he's joining us from Oslo, so you can see it's already dark there. Don't get confused if you're somewhere where it's light, you know. He's already working hard here in his evening time. So Alex, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
And now, quick intro around Goliath, in case you're not familiar with Goliath Technologies. So at Goliath, we offer software that really helps IT pros monitor and troubleshoot end-user experience issues, regardless of where users or workloads are located. One of the things is, if you talk to any one of these logos on this screen, what they're going to tell you is they've invested in Goliath because it's had the operational impact of hiring 2 to 3 full-time troubleshooting experts onto their staff. The reason it's had this impact is Goliath has embedded intelligence and automation that will automatically discover your environment, whether it be Citrix, VMware, all of your back-end systems. We will then identify what to monitor and then set alerts based on industry best standards of the thresholds that need to be set based on Citrix, Microsoft, VMware, and all the clients that we've worked through with the past decade. Another key takeaway that I want you to see here is that we work with organizations of all sizes. So we can scale up to some of the largest Citrix or VMware Horizon deployments, if you look at like a Liberty Mutual, a Bell, a Xerox. But we also have a price profile and ease of use profile that makes us very usable for medium to small-sized organizations. And finally, we do have some health systems on the line today. Here at Goliath, we have purpose-built modules for health IT. That means that we have modules specific to your EHR systems pertaining to Epic, Cerner, Meditech, Allscripts. We have business and technical relationships with all of those providers, which means that we can provide you visibility not only into how your Citrix or VMware infrastructure is working, user behavior, but also into the EHR application itself. So with that intro then, let's go ahead and let's get started and talk a little bit more about the problems that we solve. In terms of some of the problems that we solve, a lot of the things that we hear, especially as everyone went remote, is there was a lot of finger pointing to start off with in terms of My system is slow. I can't log on. My application is slow. I keep getting disconnected. So a lot of end users were calling in to IT, the help desk. They were getting then transferred to experts like you, Alex, and going, well, it must be a Citrix issue, or it must be my application issue. And there was no way to really prove, was it home Wi-Fi? Is it an issue with user behavior? Or is it something within the infrastructure? And this challenge is persisting, and it's causing a lot of frustration both within the IT as well as end users. And the challenge is, while it's frustrating and lagging, it can all be solved with data. And part of the reason that these problems exist, Yemi, if you want to go to the next slide, is there is not a single point of technology that is delivering that end user experience. So if you look at where people really start, you have your end users, and every one of your home workers is unique. How they work is unique. The endpoint that they use is unique. Their internet connection is unique. Whether they have a spouse or kids also on the internet is unique for every environment. And then they have different behaviors. Are they streaming audio in the background? Are they doing other things? And then you have your entire delivery infrastructure. So whether it be Citrix, you're using NetScale or Storefront, you might be using the broker service, your applications. You have your backend systems from your licensing server, profile servers. You have your hypervisor host layer, might be even Nutanix in there. And then any one of those elements could be on premises or in the cloud, most likely a hybrid environment. So when someone calls in and says, I have slow logon or my sessions are lagging, if you don't have that data that can isolate exactly where in this delivery infrastructure the problem exists, it becomes extremely challenging. To add to this problem then, there's very few Alexes of the world, which is great. It's why he's made quite a name for himself over the years. But we actually worked with Citrix on these numbers. If you look out there, Citrix has over, for example, 400,000 customers. On average, every organization probably needs 2 to 3 experts. And I'd argue with everyone remote, you probably need more than that. So let's say the demand's about 1.2 million. Well, there's less than 70 Alexes out there that have earned the title of CTP. There's a handful more that have CTAs. And then we say roughly around 50,000 other experts that have some varying level of certification. In fact, some of you on the phone may not even be a Citrix expert supporting Citrix. Your background might be in Microsoft, it might be in VMware, or vice versa. And here you are supporting a system that you don't know. So you've got a really complex system. You have users that now have a lot of individuality, and you don't have enough experts to support them. This is where technologies like Goliath come into play. We offer purpose-built technology, as I said, that will allow you to really anticipate these issues, which means that you can prevent them from even happening. Troubleshoot, so when issues do occur, you have real-time analytics that allow you to isolate and prove, actually give you documentation of what the root cause is and how you solved it, and finally get data that you can start sharing across IT teams, proving when issues have been resolved, and also showing performance trends over time. And we see when IT organizations really invest in this process and in tools that can help them do this, they completely transform from reactive to proactive. So I want to thank you all for sticking with me on that intro there. We are now going to turn it over to the experts and start asking some of the questions that we've received. And again, please submit your own questions. So the first question, and I think, Yemi, you hear this a lot. Alex, I'm sure you hear this one a lot, is how can IT admins prove that home Wi-Fi is the root cause of poor session performance? Because I think this is the one everyone's struggling with most. Alex, do you want to talk a little bit about what you're seeing and how admins can help solve these issues?
Sure. So first and foremost, home Wi-Fi could be anything, right? So it depends on a lot of factors: where you live, what kind of provider you have, and the speed of it, of course. And I think it was mentioned, but during this COVID times we're living in, people are locked down many places. The kids are at home, the wife is at home, everybody's sitting there working, and everybody's sharing the same bandwidth, right? So it might be actually that the bandwidth was substantial enough before COVID, right? When it maybe only was one of you that was home working, but now you have kids doing Teams or Zooms or and all sorts of other systems. And then you have somebody, some other of you are also using various systems that might interfere with, for example, Citrix, remote protocoling, HDX, all this stuff. And, you know, it might be laggerish, and it might be that the bandwidth is consumed. So how do you actually troubleshoot it, right? As an IT admin, you can't tell the user on the other end that he has to like go and find a Wi-Fi analyzer on the internet, because it might be somebody in HR that has no knowledge of IT whatsoever. They are a user, right? They log in, they do their stuff, they use their applications, and that's that. So troubleshooting Wi-Fi is a hard part, especially in these days. And yeah, you know, you might be skillful enough to go into your Wi-Fi router and open it up and see what's consuming bandwidth. But I think it's a limited amount of people that actually knows how to even configure. Speaking from my friends that I have, that are, none of them are in IT. I am the go-to guy that goes and fixes their Wi-Fis, for example. So yeah, Wi-Fi is a problem. So there are a number of obvious things you can do when speaking to the user. Like, can you see on your performance monitor? Can you get them to open up the performance monitor on their Windows PC, for example, or their equivalent on the Mac? But what if they are using like a Chromebook or something like that? How do we actually use some utilities and can actually see what's going on, right? It's not easy. So I don't know if you have something to add, Yemi, on that part. Some smart tools maybe to see that Wi-Fi part.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex, to your point, it's a really, really tough question to answer from an IT perspective. Because that is, you know, the element of the delivery infrastructure, or the element of the virtualization or the scope of the virtualization that is not being controlled by IT. IT does not control what the user has at their location, but it is important to understand what that is and understand how that impacts users. That's when our customers will head over to our session display in the technology to analyze the user session and come up with those sort of answers. So I talked about the session display, and this is it. This is within the technology, the Citrix virtual apps and desktop session display. Right now we're on the VDI, or virtual desktop session. And this is where all of those sessions in the environment would populate. So if I'm an IT admin and let's say Floyd calls in complaining that he's having some latency in his session, I can, you know, search for Floyd. I can go back and pull up historic sessions for Floyd, because, you know, of course you hear things like, you know, Citrix has been slow for the last month, right? And so here you can see all of those sessions. You could, you know, isolate the individual user session that you're looking for. Once you click down on that session, you now get a pop-up here of 7 tabs, 8 tabs, if depending on your configuration. But this is going to break down everything that went into the performance of this particular user session. So you have the summary screen, of course, that bubbles up all of those core metrics, but then you have a dedicated tab for the logon duration, a dedicated tab for the ICA connection, a dedicated tab for the virtual infrastructure, the hypervisor host, applications and processes. So anything that comes up that you would like to troubleshoot within this user session, you have the ability to do that here on this screen. Now, specifically focusing on Wi-Fi, right? Let's say Floyd called in complaining that that he was experiencing some issues while working from home. The first thing that I would look at is the round trip time to determine, okay, whether or not Floyd is actually having some problems. And these charts are dynamic, so I can, of course, click on it and have it expand, right, to get a closer look, especially with VDI sessions that are a little bit longer. I can then take a look at network latency, showing me if this user is having a problem, is it due to a network problem or is it due to something on the resource end? So these network latency is something that is in real time that we collect through our integration with the ICA protocol. So it's very, very helpful in sort of breaking open the network performance for this user. And then finally, if it is a network problem, you want to identify if it's a problem on the users end or a problem within the IT infrastructure. The best way to do that is by tying it all back to Wi-Fi, right? So connection speed. This is the amount of bandwidth available for that user at their location. So wherever this user is located, I mean, people working from coffee shops, working from home, of course. And this specifically is not just what's available to their laptop or to their endpoint machine. It is the amount of bandwidth, essentially the download speed that is available for Citrix receiver, or excuse me, workspace app on that user's machine. So if the user is, let's say, doing other things on their PC while also accessing Citrix, this will be affected, right? Because that is going to be competing with Citrix receiver or workspace app for bandwidth. This metric is also gotten through our deep integration with the ICA protocol, but it is essentially that full visibility, the ability to say to a user, yes, your connection was really poor, it dropped at this specific time, that's why you were having a problem. And then from there, you can have those productive conversations like, okay, what happened? What's going on at your home? Are you watching movies outside of Citrix? Do you have other people on your Wi-Fi router? Are you far away from your router, right? Those sort of things can be, those sort of conversations can be supported because you have the specific metrics here on the Wi-Fi performance for that user's session. Anything to add there? Alex, would you find this sort of information useful in the case of troubleshooting and identifying specifically Wi-Fi issues?
Yeah, definitely. Because as Stacy, when she introduced me, I come from Norway. Norway is a very long country. Actually, if you tip Norway like this, from the bottom to the top, and you just do it like this with the country, it actually stretches all the way down to Milan or Milano in Italy. So it's a long country, a lot of fjords,
Wow.
and mountains, and this has been an issue for Norwegian Citrix and VMware customers for many years. It actually, what I spent the vast amount of the 2000s doing when we were troubleshooting Citrix stuff, etc. And that was more or less due to poor bandwidth at that point in time. But it's not that this problem has gone and everybody has like infinity Wi-Fi speeds, right? And what I saw and what I'm seeing still is that for Norway or some other place where there are infrastructure is not maybe that great, it might also not be that your link is stable, right? It can be sloppy. And as Yemi say, I have 2 teenagers at home and a wife, and I guess right about my time now, my son is gaming and my daughter is watching something on Netflix, on the Apple TV. There's all sort of things going on, right? So if I were sitting on a Citrix environment, it would be, as Yemi is saying, competing against all these other protocols going out of the Wi-Fi router. So if there were some magic tool on the Wi-Fi routers that everybody had, that was like we could see this instantly, but there aren't, right? So to Yemi's point, this is stellar information to get on this just get go, and you also have the historic stuff. It's really cool.
I think Alex will have to
Sounds
patent
good.
your idea, although I was going to say we'll need to patent his idea now that he shared publicly, although it might not be the first.
No, but it is a big problem, and the Wi-Fi at home. I remember lockdown when it came in March in Norway. Everybody was sitting at home, and I was sitting here doing Zoom meetings. And I've been working from home for the past 5 years, and I'm not used to Zoom being sloppy, but it was. So and I wasn't even using Citrix. So,
All right, great. Well, let's move on to the next question. And this one came out of discussions, Alex, we were having as we prepared for this, and you were hearing it a lot. I was hearing it a lot as well. It started off where people maybe did some quick fixes, right? As everyone worked from home. Maybe they handed out VPN, other types of solutions. But now that everyone's on their second round of lockdowns in most countries, and we don't see an end in the foreseeable future, and we think the way of working has changed, we're seeing a lot of organizations have almost overnight doubled the size of their Citrix environment, right? From the backend infrastructure, the hypervisor host layer, all the way through all the other components. And a question that I think you're getting quite a bit, Alex, is, how do they need to do something different now to monitor and support this larger environment, right? To make sure everything is functioning the right way, especially because many people, it might take a 6-month time to roll out a change like they rolled out, and instead they did it in less than a month, right? So it was in a much more hurried fashion. And now we're saying, how do we make sure we've got the right tools to support it? What kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, it all depends on how you actually started your rollout, right? So you had something, let's say you had 1,000 users, just to take a number. And all of a sudden your organization was 2,000 more. So 1,000 more users than you were used to overnight, because the people that were normally in the office all of a sudden had to be sitting at home. And depending on how you actually scale that system out, for my customers that use Nutanix, that's a linear scaling. So we just put on some extra boxes and then they go, right? Because it's built like that. It's a dream scenario for the customers that actually had Nutanix, because you know what you have and you scale it up, right? But for the other customers that maybe had to buy white box servers or put in some extra SANs or whatever they did to get this working, you might have all these new components that were different from the ones you had, right? And managing that and scaling it out and getting a monitoring solution that actually can give you some answers is hard. Because let's face it, I think we're going to talk about it in a topic later, but using only Citrix Director to get these kind of answers, Citrix Director will give you some answers, but it won't give you these answers, right? Because it's underlying stuff. You need to see, like the picture that Yemi was showing earlier, you need to see what's going on the other parts of the stuff, not only the endpoint, right? So it might be that the users, when you came into this this situation we are currently in, you had to expand something that, like Stacy said, usually it takes 3 to 6 months and you planned and did all your necessities on beforehand, right? Before you actually start the project, you planned and done your studies and the research and whatever you wanted to do. But now you had to literally support a couple of thousand users overnight. And how did you do that? How do you monitor that they have the performance that they more or less are used to? If they have like not an office or workplace device at home, they're used to some kind of performance, right? Some kind of user experience. And let's say they use Citrix, they log on. The session is having issues, right? Is it Citrix? Is it something else? Is the application server? Is it the SQL server, the SQL server that is overloaded because all over the night it was doubled in the size of requests? All these moving parts that you now have to think about that maybe that wasn't even an issue before COVID came. And I've heard this for a lot of customers that, like, yeah, we were all of a sudden double or tripling our amount of Citrix users, and it's great if you have the infrastructure to back it up and you know exactly how to expand it. But if you had to, like, as I said initially, go in and just, you're almost like this, whoa, I have to get stuff in, I have to build stuff out, I have to get something to work, right? And my things I'm hearing out there is that it actually, people often forget that, okay, we have to actually have a monitoring system laying and actually giving us some answers. Without that, you're left in the dark, right? You can only get so much answers from Perfmon or some of these other built-in stuff in the servers, right? And Citrix Director can't give you the answers that you actually need to find. So I don't know if you have something to collaborate on that, Yemi.
Yes, I do, of course. Yeah, I think what some of the things that and you brought up, and I think you spoke pretty well to, is that with this sort of environment, with these environmental changes, not only in overall the number of users that are now accessing the environment, but where they're accessing the environment from, it is important to monitor the environment and come up with find creative ways to be able to monitor and anticipate issues before they happen. Because if the issues then take place now, they're going to be affecting larger amounts of users, and ultimately it's going to be affecting the business. So we actually have one of the proactive portions of the technology. One of the proactive pieces of the technology is something deployed like this. There is a central Goliath console that's typically deployed in the data center, as you can see there. And then you have your application launchers here at the bottom of the screen that are typically deployed at different locations, whether it's office locations. We have most of our customers now trying to set these up in the cloud. So whether that is Google Cloud Platform, AWS, Azure, and what's actually happening from these sort of these cloud locations or office locations is there's a lightweight piece of technology running on a virtual machine, or it may be a physical machine at that physical location, and it's logging on and launching applications on a scheduled basis. So 24/7, it's launching, testing the delivery infrastructure, making sure that there's a successful presentation of the applications and maybe desktops that you're providing or publishing to your users on a daily basis. So because of this, you essentially get this defense perimeter or sort of early warning system to get ahead of issues that could impact users' ability to access these resources before users are actually impacted. So you're getting ahead of the issues, you're finding them out, you have details and screenshots as to what's presenting or what would potentially present to the users, so you're able to solve them and limit the end user impact altogether. So to give you some perspective as to sort of what's happening at that location sort of automatically, there's a quick video here showing the technology in action. So from a particular location, I think this was actually in AWS, the technology is able to open up a web browser to the NetScaler storefront page, accept any security statements or license agreements, it's then able to log in the same way an end user would. It's able to confirm that the storefront page loads, navigate the storefront page, and then start launching those published applications and desktops. And this will launch 24/7, as I mentioned. Of course, you don't have to sit there and watch these take place. But this was just sort of give you an understanding of what's actually taking place and how it's going to be opening up and launching applications just the same way an end user would. Now, if there's an issue with any step of that process, that causes a failure, IT gets a real-time alert, and then they're able to then analyze the launches from this view here, which is the application availability analysis tab. So this is going to sort of be your central management and configuration console for this sort of proactive piece of the technology. And this page is broken down into two sections. You have the top section here, which is a highly effective dashboard of all of the launches taking place across the entire environment. You can see there's a yellow trend line here showing overall availability. And then you have your blue bars here representing the launch times of the applications in the environment. And of course, you can filter based on date range, based on the locations that you're launching these applications from. So whether those are office locations or AWS, Azure, so on and so forth. And of course, you can filter based on the applications and desktops that you're launching. So this now gives IT a quick view. You can go back historically as well and see all of the launches, see what availability looks like for the Citrix platform, whether that is testing it from internal connections as well as external connections. You could get a dashboard view of that sort of performance. Now, let's say, for instance, you get an alert. An issue has taken place with a particular application where it wasn't able to launch. Then you can look at the bottom section here, where you can see each individual launch, the date and time, what application was launched, where it was being launched from, and ultimately whether that launch was successful or if it failed. You can see exactly at what stage it failed. And then to get some further details, as I mentioned, you can actually click down on this magnifying glass icon here. And essentially, everything you saw in that video is represented here with screenshots. So logging into the NetScaler page or the storefront, and all the way up until the successful presentation of that application, or in a failure, you'd be able to see the exact error message that would potentially present to the users. So you're getting out of the business of relying on them to replicate or remember what error message showed up. So you're getting ahead of it, solving it, and limiting the user impact altogether. This is something that is very effective when you start having remote users, because for instance, if we take one of our customers, it was a top 5 airline company. All of their users have been remote. They're essentially their scheduling personnel when they sort of book flights and things like that. And they have this deployed in 3 regions in AWS, and they're able to test the availability from those regions ahead of time before there's reservation specialists start booking flights and things like that and accessing their environment to do so. So this is able to solve or able to allow them to catch a number of different issues that took place with their Citrix environment, whether it's Active Directory or their delivery controllers going down. They're able to catch these things, solve them, and prevent, I think, about 10,000 reservation specialists from having issues when logging in and starting their workday. Anything, did you want to add anything there, Alex, with this sort of technology? Do you find that this would find value, provide value, especially when you're seeing a number of users now starting to work from home?
I would have said that the people that had this type of technology in the mix of before we got the type of situation we have now with the COVID and everything, I think those folks are in great shape. I think for the other probably many people, I think that they need to start looking at something like this, because if you don't have this and you have all these sort of issues with the remote users, and let's face it, these remote users can be logging on, if you combated the COVID for infrastructure reasons, for going to Azure or whatever, or AWS, as you mentioned, you have probably many more facets in your infrastructure than you used to have, right? So you need to get some sort of overview of how to, where is the specific problem at the specific time, at the specific component, right? And I think you show that nicely in the the video here. So yeah.
Great. Let's go on to the next question. And we've hit on this a bit, but I think, Alex, maybe you can extend a bit more on, how has people's troubleshooting workflows and work habits changed now that most workers are remote, especially when it comes to isolating and proving root cause?
Yeah, so from everything to the app load time or the logon duration or the app response times or the session response time, or even if it has something to do with graphics, right? If it's the graphical responsiveness and quality of the graphics, or the slow logon times, or the graphic performance, you need something that can actually isolate the issue and go down and pinpoint the issue, and then actually also could find the documentation, or not the documentation, but actually find the path to what's going on, right? It's a complex situation. For instance, if a user complains about, oh, it takes a long time to load the application, and it takes a long time to log into the system, right? I used to remember getting this all the time. Oh, it's Citrix that's slow. But it might not be that Citrix is slow, because it has to do with it could be the user profiles, slow connections to the file servers. It could be the response time of backend applications, right? It could be, let's say you have some sort of application that runs and talks to a SQL server. It could actually be that the SQL server is overloaded and not accepting connections from that application, right? So it can be a mix of stuff, and all these moving parts will be separate stuff you need to actually isolate, and you actually have to go and troubleshoot them at some point. Because I can take a pretty cool project I was involved in. I think it's like 2 years ago. We did a POC with Nutanix, obviously, because I work at Nutanix, and this was a Citrix customer, and so initially they just put the old 3-tier architecture they were running on Nutanix. Simple as that. They just offloaded a sensor image over to HV, which is our hypervisor, and then we just migrated to that, and we booted up, and they went from, I think, their login times, and for the stuff they were monitoring, they said that average login times was 35 to 55 seconds. I was like, what? That's enormous, right? Yeah, but it had to do with slow file server communication, and then it was the applications it was talking to. So there was all these things going on, and then we moved it over to the Nutanix platform, and we were seeing 18 seconds login time. And then we actually moved the user profiles to Nutanix Files, which is a product that we have, it's a scale-out file server, and we were seeing 8 seconds. So the customer was like, oh, if we did this little, could we get some monitoring software to actually see how can we actually get it? Is it possible to get it below 5 seconds? Do you think? So we were actually, I was talking to them about, yeah, you have to take a look at Goliath, but because I'm pretty sure there's some more aspects we can do to tune your system so we can actually get below 5 seconds. So there are sums of infrastructure and sums of the virtual machines, and the type of virtual machines you are having when the IT admin has to really, because it's not, maybe we've discussed the Wi-Fi situation and sorts, and the amount of new users that are probably sitting at home working now. And if you don't have all this stuff in your infrastructure, like the SQL servers, maybe, I'm not sure what Yemi will collaborate on that in a couple of seconds, but I'm pretty sure one of the most obvious problems, and has been for the past 10, 15 years, has been Citrix is getting the blame, but it's actually some sort of application that is waiting for something else to happen, right? And the fact that for the end user that is logging on, it's either Horizon or it's Citrix or it's something else that is slow, because that's what they see, right? They think that's the system they are using, hence they are thinking that's what's slow. But I remember before everybody was going Office 365 and they put their email out in the cloud, it was the Exchange servers that was slow, right? Outlook was slow, but it's still like that, because clouds go down. It's just somebody else's data center, and naturally speaking, it's just somebody else's data center. And if AWS or Azure has outage, for example, the mail clients, whatever they're using, will just be staggering against something, right? So I'm not sure if you have something to elaborate on that, Yemi, but that's what I'm hearing, and that's what I would do. I would get some tool that actually can give me the answer to the problem that I'm seeing, not using all these. Back in the day, I've been working in the Citrix environment for 20 years now, or plus, actually. And back in the day, we tried to find answers with sysmon, regmon, and filemon, and all these kind of standalone products that they only did that, right? But we didn't find the actually cause of the problem, because we couldn't have any higher system at the time that could actually see what's going on here, what's really going on. And I guess that is pretty key.
Yeah, Alex, I think that you hit that right on the head, right? It is important, of course, to take a look at your infrastructure and take a look at things that you could possibly do to optimize. But essentially, what it comes down to is visibility, being able to see and have the data present to you in a single view, and be able to see that and see it in a way that pulls together everything that impacts the user in a single view, essentially. And that's what our technology does with our session display. So the same way, we talked about it before in our first example, we drilled into a user, found the session, and then clicked down on that session. We have all of the data, everything that impacts this user right here on our screen. So whether they're a remote user, whether they're a user connecting in the environment themselves, or at your data center itself, everything that impacted that user is present here. So if you look on the summary tab, you see everything from their client machine down to the NetScaler they connected in from, their delivery controller, the domain controller, down even to the hypervisor host that supported the VM that was supporting this user session. A breakdown of the logon tab, where you can drill into the logon duration tab and take a look at everything happening within the data center during the brokering stages. Being able to take a look at things on the client side as well. And this is without deploying any technology to the user's endpoint machine itself. You're able to see how long ICA file download took, or how long it took to establish the micro VPN connections. If you scroll down into the different stages of the process, these little sections expand. So you can troubleshoot authentication issues, right? Domain controller is being used, what files are being accessed, how long it took for LDAP calls to take place. And then, of course, group policies. And I know you mentioned this when it comes to logon times. It's, of course, a massive thing that impacts users. We break open each individual policy, each script that's executing inside of a user session down to the name of the policy or script. So you're essentially able to get to the root cause of your issues quickly, without sort of going through all of your different tools or pieces and things like that. Another thing that's very interesting here on this sort of troubleshooting view in the single pane, is what you can see here in the ICA-HDX channel tab here. So this is going to populate with data specific to the ICA performance for this particular user. And this is a longer session here, so you can see at the top of the screen, ICA latency, network latency, as well as ICA round trip time. Of course, you can click and zoom into each one of these different sections to get closer and get an understanding of what the performance is. What I wanted to focus on, and we talked about the connection speed as well, but what I wanted to focus on was this bottom chart here, the ICA usage chart. This is something that is extremely helpful, and specifically with the question of trying to isolate remote worker issues. This chart is going to break down all of the different types of bandwidth that is being used inside of this user session. So the ICA protocol has different virtual channels for different behaviors that could be done inside of a session. And because this breaks down those different channels, you essentially get a view as to what the user is doing inside of their session and an ability to correlate that with their latency and their issues that are taking place. So let's say, for instance, and if you look here, you can see at the bottom of the screen, there's clipboard bandwidth. There's thin-wire bandwidth, which is the Citrix display adapter. We also have things, and if I can pull up here, here we go. Here's where you will see all of the other channels that we report on. So things like USB bandwidth, media stream flash bandwidth, printer bandwidth, scanner bandwidth. So essentially, you could say, well, yeah, this user was having a problem, and that's because they're doing something graphically intensive inside of their session. And we can see that there's a correlation between that spike and, of course, there's the latency. Things like audio bandwidth, right? So maybe they have an ability to do their normal job inside of their session. However, every time they use Skype or GoToMeeting or Zoom or something like that, then
Microsoft Teams,
see their bandwidth,
right?
Microsoft Teams, there we go, right? You see that sort of that audio bandwidth impact the latency inside of their sessions. This is another very important tool to have because it allows you to really understand how your users are working and what needs to be supported, either it's from their end, from a bandwidth perspective, or internally as well, to be able to deliver a good experience for your remote workers. Hopefully that added some additional context there. I thought that, of course, the log on times are very important, but, this specifically, as users are moving remote, has been very, very helpful to a lot of our customers.
And Yemi, actually, one question came in.
Oh,
I was
sorry.
going to say, sorry, Yemi. One quick question did come in for you. I think you hit on it. It was, is this an agent-based program? And if yes, how much resources does it consume?
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a question that we get, of course, a lot. We do have a number of different methods of collecting information. One of them is agent-based. We have a lightweight intelligent agent that it's about a meg and a half in size. It takes up 0.1% of a CPU core, so it's very lightweight. I think it's about 40 megabytes of RAM on a particular machine. Excuse me. It doesn't require a reboot or anything like that as well. So it's really, really lightweight. It doesn't store or cache any information on the machines. So that's sort of the agent. It's the only technology that's actually deployed in Cerner's remote hosted facility in Kansas City. So as you can imagine, it's gone through a number of years of sort of scrutiny to be able to do so. As I mentioned before, there are a number of different other ways that we collect information. We do a lot of agentless communication APIs, so on and so forth, to be able to get all of the information here and then present it in that single pane view that we just went over.
Thank you. Sorry, Alex, you were going to make a comment there before I jumped in.
No, it's okay. You can go ahead.
All right. So let's go to, and this is the last question that we have on a slide. There's a few more generic ones, so I did pop this one in, Yemi, to you because it was timely. For the last canned ones, and everyone on the line, please submit your other questions. You know, what type of metrics, Alex, do you recommend that these IT teams are capturing and reporting on when it really comes to remote user experience?
Yeah, so I would say it's threefold, right? Because it's the end user performance, and then it's the end user activity maybe, and then it's system performance. And all of these kind of things go hand in hand in many ways because it can impact the other or the third or whatever. So definitely logon duration, because that's actually the first thing that the user is, if when he logs on, if that's excuse my English, shitty experience, it doesn't feel like it's a good system, right? Nowadays, people are playing here, doing whatever. They're used to just things flowing, right? So definitely the logon duration. I see that a lot of places is still not good enough. Take the example I was talking about earlier. It has to do also with the system performance. So maybe you have an issue in the backend with the old type of systems. You see various issues with the hardware. It's a complex infrastructure. Maybe you could scale that down and make it more easier. And for the end user activity, if it's an application that is running away with the CPU or memory leaks or whatever, I think I would focus my strategy on the latency logon duration for the end user performance, and for the system, I would actually want to see what's going on at the server side, right, with the VMs. How are the VMs feeling? So that's probably my take on that.
Yeah, and I could jump in to add there. Yeah, and that's also, you know, what we hear from customers as well, right? They want to be able to understand the end user experience first and foremost. Understand how the users are actually accessing the environment. Understand what's their performance. Are they experiencing latency? Are they experiencing high logon times? And so, of course, we have a number of different reports and give the ability to share, export, enhance data in those particular areas, right? So we have an end user experience report that breaks down the entire end user experience, everything that goes into you know, the user's experience. So logons, latency, connection speed, network latency, VDI performance, things like that. And then we have those separate reports that break it down further and show you break down the different pieces of end user experience. We also have end user activity reports and data really focus on activity, because we start to hear now that IT wants to understand how users are working and what areas does IT need to focus on in order to deliver a better experience to the users. So the productivity reports, the peak usage reports, understanding when and how they need to scale up or out the environment to support users at those sort of times where there's a lot of users accessing the environment. Application usage, license usage, of course, very, very important. And then we have the system performance, right? You want to understand the performance of the back-end infrastructure, whether that is AHV, whether that is VMware, those individual components that are leveraged to support users and deliver a virtualization platform. So that's how we segment the reports and the data in the technology. And I have a couple of examples here, just walking through some of the most popular ones that we see. So here's the end user experience report that I mentioned that's going to break down everything when it comes to their experience, their latency, their connections, their logon times as well. And you break this down and show users historically what exactly is the overall performance look like. And then we have our very popular end user productivity report. And this, as you can see, On the left-hand side of the screen, it's going to break down the users, of course, how they're connecting into the environment, so on and so forth. But it breaks down the individual sessions, the duration of the sessions, as you can see in the middle of the screen, the amount of time that they're taking interacting with the session. So how much time are they spending actually creating ICA traffic inside of their session? And then conversely, what is their inactivity time? So the time that they are not creating ICA traffic inside of their session. This is very helpful because this allows IT not only to understand, okay, are users actually working, right? They're working from home now. Are they actually working? Are they going for long walks while just logging into the environment? But also, this is a very good thing to combine, and we hear this a lot from customers, how they combine this data from the productivity report with what they get in the end user experience reports and the ICA latency reports to understand how this sort of latency or poor performance actually impacts productivity for the users. Of course, the interaction percentage is very helpful, max inactivity time as well, which is the maximum amount of time that the users are inactive inside of their session. So maybe they went for lunch or went for a long break or something like that. Gives you that visibility into how users work now in this sort of remote workspace times that we're in. So with that, we'll pass it over to Stacy for any additional questions.
Yeah, can I just add something to what Yemi was saying?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Because I also have seen a lot of problems. All these different. If you're running a VDI, and all these new builds that Microsoft is going further with, like the 1909 or whatever version you are on, actually these have performance. Could cause performance issues for you because it actually might consume more memory or more CPU, or there's some patch that actually is going on, which will eventually, if you're not in control, give you slightly less performance for the end users. So it's actually more to it. Also, that you actually need to monitor what's going on, like the way that Yemi just showed.
Alex, it's interesting. One of the use cases we had when everyone was going to Windows 10 was a lot of customers were acquiring our technology so they could do a baseline, because management and end users see we're upgrading, and that means it's going to get faster. And Windows 10 was known to actually make the system slower. But people were committing to users, you're going to get Windows 10, it's going to be so much better, it's faster, right? That's like the default term when something new is happening. It'll be faster for you. And we had a lot of admins going, that's not true. And so they knew it was going to impact performance. And so then they had to put this in place and start tweaking so that at least they could get, if not the same performance, a little better performance. So we saw that, especially when there's major upgrades, whether it's Citrix or VMware or Microsoft, but we saw that a lot with Windows 10 because there was a lot of people promising it's better and faster, and Windows 10 actually made it slower.
Yeah, and it's the same if you are running Senap or RDS or Horizon RDS. If you think about going from, let's say you are currently running 2016 Windows Server and you want to go to 2019, it actually is a more complex operating system. And if you think that, okay, for the past 4 years, I've been running, let's say, just 40 users per VM, but you're not actually, if you're not changing the infrastructure in the backend to something newer, you won't be able to get 40 users into that VM, right? So, and how do you actually pinpoint this and have the baseline that you're talking about?
Well, I know we're running low on time, but the good news is we've hit on quite a few of the questions that came in during the session. One that we haven't hit, and I hear this quite a bit, and Alex, curious on your take, is this question says, when we increased the number of users to remote, we gave everyone VPN access. Should we stick to VPN? Should we be looking at Citrix workspaces? We're a little bit concerned about security. So we've heard that was kind of a first reaction, and now people are going, what's the long-term plan? Any advice or thoughts for them?
Yeah, basically, if you're, I'm not sure if the person in question is the security issue is a major issue, and we all know that during this crisis of the COVID crisis, we've actually seen the huge uptake in hackers, right? Trying to target VPN tunnels and all sorts of other systems, and malware and ransomware and everything has been going on. I would definitely say that I would do the workspace stuff from Citrix, because it's the VPN and it's a specialized field, right? If you don't have that kind of experts, you were talking about experts here initially when you introduced us. If you don't have that sort of people in-house, you need to buy that competency all the way. And if you don't have the skill set to actually know what's going on with the VPN tunnel, I think I pretty much would do the workspace stuff because it's actually a rock solid product.
Good. Here's one, and we actually had a few questions related to this, but I'll just kind of genericize. As we look to increase the number of users, should we be considering cloud options like Citrix Cloud? So there was quite a few people asking, what's your opinion of Citrix Cloud, and is that something that they should be thinking about moving to, and when?
So somebody is asking a Nutanix guy if this question.
You are a Citrix CCP still, right?
I am. It all depends, right? Because there's a few cons with the cloud, and I think everybody knows what the con is. It's yeah, you saw this. I'm not sure if it was this week or the late last week when AWS had an outage, right? You have to really think about that. As I said earlier, these clouds are just somebody else's data center. It can be overperform, how do you say it in English? I lost the word, but you can experience that it's overloaded. You can experience that it's down. And I see actually more and more customers thinking of bringing their data center down to their place again, because they tried something. It's also down to money, right? Because it's not that expensive, although it looks expensive. It might be even more expensive because it's not cheap to run stuff in the cloud. As a temporary solution, I might actually think that it might be a good solution, because if we all get the COVID shots and the pandemic is gone next year and people go back in the offices, I think you would be good, but who knows? And like Stacy said, the workforce is used to sitting at home now, and it saves businesses a ton of money not having expensive offices anymore. But doing the on-prem, and if you look at what Gartner and Forrester and all these are saying, they're saying we have to live in a hybrid cloud environment for a couple of years, or maybe 10 years. I think it is 10 years they're saying. And that means that it all depends, right? It depends on the infrastructure you're looking at, what that infrastructure has of skills. Because, if you go in Citrix Cloud, that's a Citrix Cloud, and it's managed there, and it's fixed. You can choose if it's on this or that cloud. If you have an infrastructure that actually can either be on-prem or actually move stuff up to the cloud at the same time, I would prefer that. Of course, I work at Nutanix, so that's what we're doing. But yeah, Citrix alternative, of course. But I'm not saying I'm old school, but there are some mechanisms with the cloud providers that are I mean, it's numbers. basically, because it's not cheap.
Okay.
Like we did now with AWS, you can actually spin up stuff, and when the crisis is over, you can hibernate it, so it won't cost you any money anymore, right? On AWS, we do that with Nutanix nowadays with clusters, and let's say a new pandemic comes, you can just spin it up, but it hasn't cost you any money. The other stuff is a term-based license that's running, right?
Yeah, we actually had, and I'm sorry, I'm going to mess up the pronunciation of your name, Payush, say, cloud can be really expensive when you start adding storage and everything else that can come with it and making resources available right away. So with everything, there's trade-offs. So we are 5 minutes over. So I want to say again, Alex and Yemi, thank you so much for your time. If anyone has a question that we did not get to, or there's something that you didn't get to ask, please email techinfo@goliathtechnologies.com. We're happy to pass any questions over to Alex if you have specific ones for him. And if you are interested in learning any more about Goliath, please, email us. We offer free trials. And I'm sure, Alex, if they find you, they have questions on Nutanix. Again, if you have questions, we're happy to pass you off to Alex as well. But we really appreciate you being on today. And we appreciate everyone that stayed on and the interaction we had. And Yemi, as always, great demos and great smile, I always have to say. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Stay safe, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Yes, please. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.